2 weeks ago, I did a story about a mass shooting that went largely unreported because it was stopped by a good guy with a gun. Typical, right? I know. Now, in the video, I was reacting to a news clip where they interviewed a Army veteran by the name of Morgan. You see, Morgan was also there that day during the mass shooting and was actually at a clinic where there were some shots that ended up going in their direction. And he was able to see how a lot of this went down. He actually saw the first person that got shot die. Unfortunately for Morgan, Morgan was in a facility that was a gun-free zone, so he wasn't able to have a weapon on him legally. And I thought to myself, you know what? This is exactly what it feels like to be completely helpless when there's a mass shooting that takes place because of a gun-free zone. And I talked about that in the video. And lo and behold, later on, I got an email from Morgan himself thanking me for doing the video on the shooting to give it more coverage. And I figured it'd be a good idea to have Morgan come on the podcast to talk about his experience and what he saw so that we all can learn from it. Because I think these types of stories are very valuable for us who haven't been in situations like this, so that if we ever do find ourselves in those situations, we have a better idea of what we can do. So what you're about to watch is that conversation between me and Morgan, or if you're listening to this podcast via audio, you're about to hear my conversation that I had with Morgan.
I've been very active about the whole being pro carry. And so when people say, oh, we need common sense gun laws and gun zones, it's like, what is that going to do? This man, I just witnessed him execute somebody, and then I learned later on kill another woman in her car. Do you really think, in your mind, this is what blows me away with people that are so anti-gun, do you honestly believe that I don't want to use foul language, that guy would have come to that door, saw that sign and been like, oh, no guns allowed in that place, I don't want to break any rules, I'd hate to become a criminal. No, he's going to look at that and say, boom. He obviously thought that there was no one armed at Harris Teeter. You might as well paint a bullseye on that building. And so make sure you're an advocate. Don't be afraid to speak up. If people try to politicize it, don't get angry. Just talk to them and say, let's look at this in the timeline that unfolded. Don't just look at it as a bad guy with an AR killed some people, because guess what? He took out 2. You can take out 2 people with a knife. You can take out 2 people with, the most rudimentary of weapons. And secondly, if anyone out there finds themselves in this situation, do not be a dumbass like me and stand there and watch. I know fear is a funny thing. It will cause you to lock up and stare and try to figure out and process, wait, is this really happening? Doesn't matter. You don't have time to figure out, is this fake or is this real? Seek cover, seek concealment, seek anything around you. If you can barricade yourself, use whatever resources are around you. Make sure that you're forcing yourself outside of the fear to run through your mind of, okay, what happens if he gets in here?
This episode of the Colion Noir podcast is brought to you by Vetter Holsters. All right, so you reached out to me. So for the people who don't know who you are, Morgan, you were there on the day when the mass shooting at the Teeters took place in Virginia. And so you inevitably ended up reaching out to me because you saw that I talked about you in my video about the shooting, and I thought it would be a good idea. You didn't reach out to me for any purpose, just for people who know. It was just kind of like, hey, thanks for shining light on what happened. And so for me, I thought it'd be a good idea to have you come on and kind of talk about your experience there, because I think it would be good for a lot of people to kind of hear it from your perspective as somebody who was a bystander there, who saw everything go down. And then I mentioned specifically in the video how, you really couldn't do much because you weren't armed that day. So there wasn't much you can do in terms of fighting back. So just kind of, I guess, start me off on that day right before everything kind of took place.
Sure. So across the parking lot from Harris Teeter, there's an Augusta Health Clinic. It's kind of like a Med Express. I had to get a doctor's note for work. So I showed up for work that morning, and they sent me home and said, sorry, we need that form. And I was like, damn, well, I don't want to go. It's a Monday. And I was like, I don't want to go beat the crowd from that weekend, so I'll just wait until after lunch. So kill time that day, went to Med Express. I think I got there at about 1:25 and was in the process of checking in. I was standing at the reception desk. And to kind of orientate you, so if I'm looking at the camera, that's the reception desk. Mm-hmm. The wall left is all windows. And outside those windows is the parking lane, the aisle that leads straight to the exit of Harris Teeter. So if I make a 90-degree turn, I'm looking dead there. So I was in the process of checking in, and she had just scanned my driver's license. and was literally in the process of picking it up and handing it back to me. And right when she was doing that is when it was either four back-to-back shots about a quarter of a second apart, and then like a second later, one single shot. And the nurse that was checking me in just goes, "Oh, what's that?" And I immediately recognized that it was gunfire. And so I very kind of quietly mumbled, "That's gunshots." And it sounded like it was coming a bit more to when you're looking out the windows to the right. So I turned and I couldn't see because the actual solid wall starts right there. So I took like 2 steps to my left to look over that way. And that's when he opened up again, and it caught my attention, and directly straight in front of me down that aisle, the suspect was walking. He was, I'd say, maybe 40 feet outside the exit of Harris Teeter, was facing, directly at me. And it caught my eyes. And that's when he took out his first victim, the 43-year-old male. In seeing that, I didn't have time. I was kind of looking out, thinking that it was like maybe somebody's doing a stupid YouTube skit or a TikTok. Or here in especially when I lived in Charlottesville, there's plenty of people who are social media and they kind of do stupid stuff. So you'd be out to dinner all the time, and people would do the dumbest stuff, staging fights, throwing safety glass bottles at each other. So at first I kind of thought, like, is somebody doing something kind of funny? And once I saw Peter go down, that's when it hit me, kind of. Like, in my mind, I knew, I was like, this guy's shooting this guy. And so many thoughts go through your mind in a split second. The first thing I'm like, are they in an argument? Is this like over a parking space? What is this? So within the next, I'd say 2 seconds, it felt like forever. He then turned so he was shooting directly in front of him. He was on the left side of the aisle. Peter was directly in front of him against that row of cars. So the first victim was shot, and he turned. There was a red Subaru backing out of a parking spot, and it stopped. Now, I'm not sure if she was just backing up or if she was trying to flee once the shooting started. That caught his attention. Without turning, he was walking very slowly, very deliberately, and without breaking his direction, turned and began opening fire on the Subaru, and I saw the windows exploding. And that's kind of when it really hit me of, like, these are live rounds. This guy's really doing this. But again, this entire time, it felt like forever. It was only about total, I'd say, maybe 5 or 6 seconds. And I still just stood there, staring, not moving. And I immediately recognized that it was an AR-style weapon. Having been in the Army and fired M6. And the first thing that caught me, too, was when he was holding his weapon, he was holding it very tightly to the chest in a very almost awkward kind of posture. He wasn't aiming down the side. He wasn't, trying to be accurate by any means. So he opened fire on that Subaru, and I remember seeing an older gentleman that was standing on the opposite side, and he paused for, again, a second, and then opened up another 4 or 5 rounds towards this gentleman. And I honestly do believe it's because he was not aiming down the sights. He was just firing from, I don't know what you'd call that position, from the chest, like Ramboing it. Like a,
I guess would that be considered hip firing? Maybe. I guess not.
When I was talking to the detective, that was the word that I used, is he was hip firing. And I know it's not like, the arm straight down, just firing like Arnold Schwarzenegger type style. He was not being accurate by any means. And but like I said, I knew it was an AR-15 the moment that I saw it. So I think that's what saved that gentleman from being hit, because, again, this guy was maybe 20 feet away from that gentleman and somehow didn't get hit by a single one of those. Like I said, I think it was 5 rounds that he fired. But again, in that moment, it was slow motion. And another thing I wanted to talk about, too, is you hear people in documentaries and whatnot say that, it was 30 seconds or a minute, but it felt like forever. And I used to think to myself, like, how does it feel like forever if it's that fast paced, And then now that it's happened, it's like a feeling that you can't describe other than saying it felt like slow motion, and it really did. And again, I sat there just frozen. He had on a black hoodie with the hood pulled up, had on sunglasses, and he was close enough. It was 173 feet from what the detectives told me when they did the measurements from where I was standing inside that clinic to him. So I was close enough that I could see his mouth. He had no facial expression. He wasn't like gritting his teeth. He didn't look angry. He looked like, honestly, any customer walking out of a grocery store. A very
Yeah.
blank expression.
All right, so I've got to give a quick shout out to Vetter Holsters. They're now sponsoring the podcast. I've been using their light tuck kydex inside the waistband holster, and what I really like is how adjustable it is. You can tweak the ride height and cant to get it exactly how you want. Plus, they've got holsters for over 450 gun models in 75 different colors, so you can pretty much find whatever you need. But here's the thing that really sets them apart: their customer service. I've heard so many stories about how they've gone above and beyond to make sure you're happy with your holster, and with a lifetime warranty and a 30-day money-back guarantee, it's clear they stand behind their products. If you're in the market for a great holster, check them out at betterholsters.com.
So I reached my hand over, and the nurses told me this. I didn't remember this part, but I turned to my right and began tapping my hand on the counter, trying to get the words out, and you couldn't. It's like in a dream when you're trying to yell and no words come out. I was stuck like that, and I'm tapping the counter, and I finally got out. I was like, active shooter. And a second nurse had come from the hallway, like trying to figure out what those sounds were. And she goes, what? And then the nurse that was checking me in kind of like stands up to lean forward to look over the desk so she could see out the window because they have a wall blocking. And as soon as she did that, that's when the first rounds, the first one hit the building. Up above the windows. There's that metal trim. It hit up there. And I've, of course, never been shot at in my life. Outside of basic training, but again, that's a totally different thing. You're not actually being shot at.
Yeah.
So I've heard rounds over me, but I've never heard the impact of a round. And you would be amazed at how loud it is when a round impacts something near you. Once I heard that, and I reached my hand over and grabbed the far side of the counter, and the second round hit the glass and passed about 2 feet to my left. And I finally just yelled out, active shooter. And as I leaped, I used my other arm and kind of pushed the nurse back as I was over the counter. And so fell onto the floor, and my phone was in my hand, thank goodness, because I was trying to pull up my insurance information from the VA. And so instinctively, and thank God for this feature on Apple, I know it saved people in other situations, my right thumb was going ballistic on that lock screen just over and over and over again. And I remember hitting the floor, my phone was stuck under my chest, and I kept clicking, and finally I stopped and looked, and I saw that it was doing the countdown. And I went to reach to swipe for it to just skip the countdown and start calling. And another round came through and hit, and I was like, nope, screw this. And so I just stood up and ran. And then I realized there was still a nurse out front at the desk, and she was, I'm not sure what she was doing, but she hadn't gone back. And so I grabbed her and said, go, get, like it's an AR, go. So get her back there. They run into rooms and start locking the doors. And that's when I heard the last round come into the lobby, and I'm not sure what it hit. I think it might have hit a chair. So everyone else had gone in, locked doors, and I was just kind of standing there. And I went up to one door, and I was going to bang on it saying, like, let me in. Then I was like, wait, he was walking this way. He could come through that door at any second. I don't want them to unlock those doors. So I went back to, I finally found an empty exam room in the very back hallway on the left. And there's no lock on the door. I saw that when I first walked into it. And I'm like, go figure. Like, there's no lock on the door. Okay.
Yeah.
I walk in there, and it looked like it was more of kind of a, not a storage room, but they weren't actively using it. So they were just kind of putting stuff in there. So I get in there, shut the door, and I'm looking around me like, I need to barricade the door with something. And the only thing that I had in that room, aside from these lightweight boxes with, medical supplies, was the exam table. And so I just grabbed it, ripped it off the floor, and shoved it in front of the door. And I leaned my back up against it.
Did the door have any glass or anything like that?
No, it's a solid wood door. So they're very heavy. I mean, like you've seen, it's a very solid, heavy door. And kind of a dumb fun fact, but just showing kind of what you think about in the moment. When I slam that door, it's heavy, and it doesn't have a slow close hinge or anything. And I remember when I first slammed it, I thought, oh, God, when you slam a door accidentally and you're just like, oh, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
So I braced back against the table. But then I realized, I was like, I know that was an AR-15 for sure. So it's either 223 or 5.56. That wooden door is not going to do a whole lot. And this exam table is made of aluminum. It's not going to stop the round. So I need to be away from this thing. And so I got up and just stopped and was trying to listen. And that's when I noticed that my mouth was caught and dry. Like, my mouth has never been that dry before. And I listened to hear if I could hear any more gunshots, and I couldn't. So finally, I realized my phone is online with 911, and so many calls were going into the local center here, it got forwarded to the next county over. And so trying to tell them, once I finally, started talking to them, and I was like, active shooter, Harris Teeter Crozet. And they said, where are you? And it was the most frustrating thing. I was like, active shooter, Harris Teeter Crozet on Rockfish Gap Turnpike. There's an active shooter. He has an AR-15. I know there's at least 2 people down. And they were like, sir, you're in Buckingham County. And that's when it hit me. And I was like, this is going to be useless. And so I just hung up. I was like, I know other people have called.
Yeah.
So that moment, and that's one of the pictures that I sent you, I took a picture of the exam table wedged against the door. I sent it to my mom, and I said, active shooter, Harris Teeter, I love you. Because I didn't know what was going to happen. And like I said, he was walking towards the clinic away from Harris Teeter. So I didn't know if he was going to come to the clinic next or what.
Yeah.
So I stayed for a couple of minutes, and I remember hearing a toilet flush because my room was next to a bathroom. And I was like, well, if someone's using the bathroom, maybe, it's the weirdest it's real. And I'm like, did I miss this? Was this a drill? Was this a skit? And so I cracked open the door and looked into the hallway, and there was nobody. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a risk, walk out there. And when I walked out there, I could see that there were already emergency vehicles in the parking lot. The first ambulance was pulling up. And that's when I clued in, the scene is either secure or there's enough people around I can at least, go out. But like I said, everything was so slow motion. And the one part that kept going through my mind over and over and over again was, I'm not armed. Like, I'm a very big proponent of carrying. And when I walked into the clinic, they have those big white decals on the door that say no firearms, no knives.
Yeah,
no
that was going to be my
backpacks.
next question. Yeah.
Yep. And I remember as I was walking in, I was going to, check my hip, but I realized I was like, no, I know for sure that I don't have it on me because I didn't even have a belt on that day. So I was like, okay, so I know my holster isn't there, so I don't have it. So that was probably the biggest heart-sinking moment aside from what I witnessed. It was the feeling like I have nothing. You always talk about, I carry because you'd rather have that weapon and not need it than not have that weapon and need it. And it was the most frustrating and angering thing of, you've got to be kidding me. I'm stuck in a place where there's a placard on the door that says no guns. Excuse me, that may be the difference between life and death because we don't know what this guy's going to do. But yeah, that's the events as they played out. And like I said, everything happening in slow motion took on a brand new meaning. And the fact that I stood there 173 feet away, which I know sounds like a good distance for some people, but if you fired long barrel weapons, the 173 feet is nothing, means nothing. And around with that much. Yeah.
Yeah, I've shot handguns at 183, 200 yards. So for an AR, that's nothing.
It's absolutely nothing. So it was a very heart-sinking, like, God, why does this have to happen? Like, if I were in Harris Teeter, good chance I'd be carrying, but I'm at this clinic just where I honestly could have gone at any point during the day. And now I'm sitting here unarmed with honestly a door that's not going to stop those rounds, a table that's not going to stop those rounds, and a guy who clearly has motivation to shoot whoever. I knew right away it was not targeted. And that's one of the things that kind of really pissed me off in the beginning is the first couple of reports that came out that after it was a targeted dispute. One person even said that it was over a girl or something, and it was just innocent people caught in the crossfire. And again, having witnessed it, I was like, no, he was literally locking onto anything around him. And just, if you're a target, you're going to walk towards that target. If you're moving, you're going to walk towards that target and close the distance as you engage it. And he kept going straight, and he just rotated his body based on who or what he wanted to shoot at. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it played out.
What was the expression on his face when you saw him, in terms of like, what was his demeanor? I know you kind of got into it a little bit, but like, what was he, was he wide-eyed? Was he, this? What?
So I couldn't see his eyes. He had the sunglasses on.
Oh yeah.
That's etched into my brain that, I've never seen, at least not that I can recall off the top of my head, any sort of shooting video where the shooter had on sunglasses, and on top of that, the hood pulled up. It was a black hoodie. All I could see was his mouth, and his mouth was not open. He was not gritting his teeth. He wasn't mouthing to himself. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't smiling. It was this expression of, this is just a normal day. Like, I'm walking out of the grocery store. There's nothing new to me about this, or nothing out of the ordinary. It was a cold, blank expression that, like I said, you couldn't pick up any emotion coming from that guy's face whatsoever.
Gotcha. And now, do you know if they've figured out any motive or anything like that behind why he did it?
So there was going on Facebook, of course, and with at least one of my coworkers, his family knew the shooter and their family. So motives were flying around in a small town. People were throwing things out there. I remember seeing a comment from one lady. She's like, I live in Crozet, and we all know each other, and I will tell you, he had an AK-47 fully automatic, and he followed this, and it was a dispute. He was the tenant, and the guy he shot was his landlord. And I was like, what? First off, AK-40, no, like, turn off MSNBC, shut up. No, that caused me to leave a comment on one of the Facebook pages of the local news station, the one that you included the clip of.
Yeah.
That's when I left a lengthy comment saying, I'm sick of the conspiracy theories. Like, I was there, I witnessed it. It was an AR, 100%. Like, no details had come out from the police yet, other than just the very basic generic that you get. I knew it was an AR, and I knew that it was not targeted. And I think I even said in the comment, if it began as a targeted shooting, because I didn't see what those first 5 rounds hit, it turned a random shooting. So that stuff was beyond infuriating, and another reminder of how toxic social media can really become. These people were coming up with wild stories of what the shooting was. So it was beyond aggravating, and that's why I was so happy when the news reached out to me and said, would you like to speak on this? And I was like, well, yeah, because if we get this story out, because the police aren't saying anything, all this can kind of stop. Because the families are going to be local. They're probably going to hear rumors where there's going to be one insensitive person out there who's going to reach out to either a friend or a family member of one of the victims or the shooter and say, well, I saw this on Facebook. Is this true? And that can only further add to the trauma that the family or victims or what. But yeah, like I said, it was a blank expression that indicated nothing.
Gotcha. So what do you know about so now that we've gotten your perspective, and we're still going to get basically this is still your perspective because it's you telling us what you saw or what you know about it. So what do you know about the person that actually put down the shooter and how that went down?
So the first indication, 2 police officers came into the clinic. Once they heard that there was a witness to the shooting, 2 county police officers came in to speak with me and said, hey, did you see this? I said, yes. And they were like, well, we need you to stay right here, and we're going to stay with you. So while they were standing there, one of the other officers recognized me from when I was a 911 dispatcher. And so we started a conversation and talking with them. And I kept standing up out of the chair and kind of looking out the window. And they said, don't worry, the shooter is, we can, there's no threat to you. You're safe. Every officer in the county is on scene. And I said, well, I don't want that every officer's here. I want to know, did the suspect get away, or did you guys neutralize him? And his exact words were, we didn't take him out. And I thought that was kind of like wait, what? Well, he's clearly down. Maybe he escaped. But if there were currently an ongoing threat, they'd be acting very differently.
Yeah.
That was the first hint that I got. And then it wasn't until I think it was maybe 2 hours later, because they kept me for a full 3.5 hours after. And finally, I think it was one of the detectives who said that it was a bystander that had opened fire. And my first thought was, good guy with a gun. Thank God. Yeah. Perfect. That's exactly why we carry for situations like this. After that, I asked how many victims, and he said, we're not sure yet. We're still investigating that whole, pre-written response.
Boilerplate, yeah.
Exactly. So, but over the next day or two is when a lot of facts kind of started flowing in. And I think it was that night when a friend who knew that I worked, because my workplace is right next door to Harris Teeter, and they reached out to me and said, are you okay and whatnot? And I said, yeah, this is what happened, but thank God a civilian with a weapon took him down. And they said, no, it wasn't a civilian. It was an FBI agent off duty. And I was like, oh,
So
well, even better. Like,
yeah,
that's awesome. Like, thank God for them being in that location. Now, again, turns out it wasn't an FBI agent, but it was something federal is the rumor I got. So all that I gathered from one of my friends that works at that Harris Teeter said that the person was with their family. They heard the shots as they were finishing checking out, and they pushed their kids off to an employee. That sounds bad, not push their kids off, but said, get back, go. And that's when they went to the door, observed what was happening, and then engaged the shooter. Outside of that, I do know that they have still come into Harris Teeter a couple of times. We still, of course, don't know who he is, and even if we did find out, we're not going to say anything.
yeah,
But they are local here to Crozet, and again, I don't know who that man is. I'm probably never going to speak to him. But all I want to do is tell that man, thank you for what you did that day, because it could have been so much worse. The shooter had an extra 4 magazines, which is at least, that's 120 rounds.
yeah,
That he had. And whoever that agent was, that off-duty federal officer, they saved a lot of people that day, because who knows where he would have gone next, what his plans were. And so, but yeah, as far as who he was, that's all we figured out. And honestly, I'm kind of happy with it being that way. But in case he does see this, thank you for what you did, because even though you're obviously not going to get the recognition that you deserve, it was a brave move, and especially being with your family, I can't imagine what that's like. So he did an amazing thing that day and saved a lot of people, I have no doubt.
yeah. Now, at the time, I'm going to go back to when you were in the little room, when you had the door closed and you had the table pushed up against it. Well, did you have a plan about what you might do if he did come in there and start shooting through the door?
So first thing is, I remember when we lived at a couple towns over in Stanton, Virginia, and my mom and my had a conversation about, because there was a very small window in there. My mom had talked about, what if there's a fire? How does he get out? And my stepdad had told me, like, well, all you have to do is kick through the drywall and squeeze yourself through the studs, and you can egress that way. And so I was like, am I going to have to kick through and run out the backside? Because more than likely he's not going to go to the back of the building. And I remember trying to picture, like, okay, I was in the lobby, I went forward, and then I took a left, which means that I'm on, the only thing that's going to be next to me is, I think it's a Verizon store. And I was like, I'm surrounded by other stores on both sides, and I knew there was going to be cinder blocks behind that drywall. So that idea kind of went out the window as far as egressing out a different way. So honestly, my first thought, and that's when I stopped and listened to the shooting, I was like, if he does start shooting through this door, the only defense that I possibly have is maybe jump up on the little table with like the sink and whatnot and the cotton swabs. I was like, maybe I can jump up on this table, and if he does walk through this door, dive and try to get control of the barrel of that weapon, because at least that's one thing about a long firearm, is if you gain control of the muzzle, you can at least somewhat control where he's shooting. That was my only plan. Outside of that, like, what do you do? And first off, how do you avoid the rounds coming through the door? If he does start shooting, I mean, there's not really much else that you can do. So again, that's where I really felt helpless, and I was kind of pissed at myself, like, you're cornered in the back of this place, and you're kind of out of luck with as far as what you can do to, get out of this situation. And so no, I really had no plan other than just dive and pray that if he comes through that door, that he's smaller and that he's not experienced with that weapon, and maybe you can gain control of it. But I mean, like, who knows if that.
So I do have another question. It might be a little unfair, but and this is, I guess, more for my curiosity more than anything, because I like to learn from people who've been in these types of situations as best I can, and I just kind of like to learn different ideas and perspectives. So let's say in that event, let's say when you were in there, you actually were armed. Did you? And I know I've known, and this is just in my dealings of talking to different people about these types of scenarios. You tend to get different approaches, right? You get some people, like for instance this guy who was there who took down the shooter. They're going straight at it. Then you have people who are like, no, I'm gonna stay where I am and make sure that everybody else who's with me, in terms of who's in this building, so forth and so on, is protected in case this person gets to this point. And then I can take care of it from there the best I can because I'm the only one with a gun. How do you think? And this is Monday Morning Quarterback for you, right? How how do you think you would have approached it based on what you know and what your body did, your mind did? How do you think you would have approached the situation differently if you did have a gun?
If I did, engaging him from that distance was out of the question because first off, I carry, and so
Oh, I'm sorry. Say
I've
that
never
again.
shot. I carry hollow points in my
Okay.
Glock, so it's like I don't know if the rounds having to travel through that glass first would have deflected their trajectory enough. I mean they're fairly thick windows, and like I said, in some of those pictures you can see like they're decently thick.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the VIN took a ricochet off the asphalt, which didn't affect the velocity too much, but it did stop one of those rounds from actually penetrating. So I knew that engaging through that glass at a range of 173 feet, it's like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to pretend to be a massive expert or a marksman with iron sights on a Glock.
Yeah.
And like I said, behind him was the doors to Harris Teeter. So even if I did choose to engage from that distance, I could risk hitting somebody else. I could risk hitting somebody else walking out of the store. So that was out of the question no matter what. I don't even think I would have tried at that range to engage him. So I think more than likely, because there's a locked security door that patients get brought through, and that door is still locked and shut. And then behind the nurses or the reception desk, there is an empty doorway that leads back to the hall that patients go, or that the staff goes down. So I think looking back on it, I mean, honestly, I would have just stayed in that hallway because more than likely he'd try to come through the door, even though it's all glass. Like humans are still going to try to use a door. So I would have just waited in that hallway because it lines up perfectly with that door, and try to stay in concealment long enough to where if he did approach that door, I'd wait until I had a clear line of sight. And at that range, I mean, the glass doesn't matter. So I could have then engaged him from that point. And I carry 17 plus one in the chamber. So that's 18 rounds to take down one guy who
Yeah.
hopefully would not be. So no, I would have stayed in concealment. And like I said, thank God for my Army training, the difference between cover, concealment. So I would have had some cover at that point, and would have just stayed there and basically let him bring himself as close as possible to me, therefore making those limited 18 rounds that I had, have a greater chance of neutralizing the thing. So yeah, easily in that situation, I would not have tried to engage from that distance. Running outside and trying to confront him, I mean, that's pretty much out of the question as well, because again, his weapon has much more range, much more velocity. So I'm looking at it, I would have just stayed in the closest quarters to where he would have had to come to me instead of me having to try to touch him.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I probably would have been. I would have approached it the same way, or especially considering the circumstances you were in. Like I said, I hear so many different ways that people respond to different situations, and it's always intriguing and interesting to see how somebody else would approach it, because you learn things, right? And that being said, like after everything kind of went down and you started to have these conversations with these different media outlets, what was that experience like in dealing with the media? Because that's essentially how I came across you, was the interview you did with that particular news station. What was that experience like?
Well, word spread very quickly that I was there because, of course, like I said, Crozet, small town. When the first one reached out to me, and I was like, sure. And then while I was walking to because my car was sealed into the crime scene since I was parked there, so I couldn't take it that day. But when they reached out to me, I was like, yeah, I can get the true story out there. And so I agreed to do it. There's 2 news outlets that I talked to, and my main goal was kind of putting out there exactly what had happened, because I knew that information that was publicly would be very limited.
Yeah.
So moment it seemed like something that I wanted to happen, and something that was good to get as much information out there as possible. Again, I'd already talked to the detectives and told them everything, so it wasn't like I was putting out information that, the key people didn't know.
Yeah.
And so both of them, when I finished, said that, it's going to be airing tonight if you want to watch it. And I told both of them, like, nope, not going to watch it. Just make sure you put it out there. And I'm not going to name specific channels. One was much better than the other, but in the interviews I talked about, towards the end, I discussed, thank God there was an armed person there, and they took down this shooter. I mean, I quoted between 20 and 30 seconds in the interview, and that was the day after the shooting. And it turns out it was exactly 20 seconds. And I talked about, I think there was an armed agent there. I don't think I said agent, but there was an armed person there that was able to, and by the grace of God, walking out. I mean, again, I don't know much about the shooter, but it's like, you must really have the worst luck in the world if you decide, I'm going to go hurt people, and then God says, well, you know what? Walking out of the store behind you is going to, has great aim, and you're not going to know what's behind you. So, but then I think my mom watched.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So the person that actually engaged him, he engaged him from behind.
Correct. So he got to the two sets of doors going into Harris Teeter. There's the outside ones, and then there's like a big, what would you call it, foyer type thing where the grocery carts are, and they store home shop. And then there's a second set of sliding doors that actually opens up into the store. So he came to the first set of doors that lead directly to the outside. And from that position, at first I heard that he kind of concealed himself and leaned out from the side and engaged. But then through talking to someone who witnessed it directly, they said that he just took up a stance directly standing and engaged directly in the open. So he, like I said, that's a part of the reason with, what he did was very brave. He did not try to conceal. He said, that's right there. I'm going to take the stance, take him down. So yeah, he was facing away from Harris Teeter at the exit door, and the gunman was about, at that point, probably a good 60 to 70 feet in front of him down the parking. He had a direct line of sight. The suspect had no hint whatsoever that there was an armed person behind him. So again, by the grace of God, with that timing, the suspect was still well within range of being engaged with a handgun, especially with someone who's trained, federally with a sidearm. And so again, he had what you would basically call the most. I think the only other perfect position would be somebody in their car who's got a weapon in their console or their glove box, could directly. So this guy had the most perfect position that you could ask for, basically, to engage.
I hate to use the word beautiful, right? But there's a certain beauty about the idea of having armed citizens around in this type of situation. And the reason why I say that is because when you're a concealed carrier, like you pointed out, you carry a gun that has 17 rounds, and then you're in a situation you're not going to engage 107 feet through glass. Your rounds aren't going to do that. So the only advantage that people who conceal carry, citizens that conceal carry, is the element of surprise. That's literally our only advantage. And I think in a lot of ways, there's a certain arrogance or an overconfidence, I think, that the shooter had, where you think, I have the biggest gun. I have the biggest gun in this environment right now, and I'm going to do all the damage, not realizing, like you said, right behind you is somebody with a smaller gun, but has the element of surprise, right? And as you pointed out, having people, like, the only thing that could have been better is maybe somebody in their cars who had a gun that could also engage them that way too. So there's an aspect to this type of mass shooting where I think the shooter doesn't really know what to expect or what he's going to have to deal with when it comes to doing whatever he thinks he's going to do when you're in an environment where people do carry. And that's the essence that I think I try to communicate when it comes to the idea of having armed citizens, because, like you said, like, the guy was just walking out, minding his business. I called him a civilian. Like, I know he's a federal agent of a sort, but I just called him a civilian because that's essentially what he was. At that time, he wasn't on duty. He wasn't looking for it. He was with his family, and it happened to be as he was coming out there, he was. And so for me, I look at him as just another armed citizen, right? And like you said, like, you so happened to be in a place where you couldn't carry a firearm, but luckily there was somebody else there who was carrying a firearm. So even though, You get what I'm saying? So even though you didn't have that ability to carry a firearm, when there's other people there to carry firearms, it kind of has the same effect to the same degree.
Yeah, especially, considering, he was carrying his own personal weapon. So honestly, and you're right, it's almost more correct to refer to him as a civilian, because at that time, I know that, an officer on or off duty is always an officer, yada, yada, yada. But he was carrying his own personal weapon. Take the federal equation out of it. The only thing you're gaining in that situation is that he's got the marksmanship training, the discipline to be able to very quickly look and see, first off, what's the situation? That was the other thing too. I'm sorry, I totally forgot to cover this, but in thinking back, I was like, running outside and confronting him. Well, he could have gotten out there right after I took the suspect down, and then all he's heard is gunshots. He sees bodies laying in the parking lot, and he sees some goofy-looking dude standing there with a Glock pointed at someone, and he thinks, oh, this must be the shooter, and then I get taken out.
Yeah.
So the element of surprise, and like I said, he had no idea, in his expression and the calmness with which he walked. He was not expecting anything. And Croze is very anti-gun, very, I don't want to use political terms, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
It's frowned upon. So, but I made a joke to, I think I texted, I can't remember, was it my mom or my stepdad, but I took a picture of the door. I was sitting in my car because they wanted me to wait on scene while I was waiting on another detective to come talk to me. And while I was sitting there, that's when I looked back at the door, because my car's right in front. And I took a picture of the door with that sign that said no firearms, no weapons. And I took a picture. And then it was that night or the next day, I sent it to one of them and said, you know what, guys, I've blown this whole thing out of proportion. I was in a no-gun zone. I was safe. That door would have stopped that guy in his tracks. Wow. Boom. And that's another thing I've been very active about the whole, being pro-carry.
Yeah.
And so when people say, oh, we need common sense gun laws and gun zones, it's like, what is that going to do? This man, I just witnessed him execute somebody, and then I learned later on kill another woman in her car. And do you really think, in your mind, this is what blows me away with people that are so anti-gun, do you honestly believe that I don't want to use foul language, that guy would have come to that door, saw that sign, and been like, oh, no guns allowed in that place, I don't want to break any rules, I'd hate to become a criminal. No, he's going to look at that and say, boom. He obviously thought that there was no one armed at Harris Teeter, but it's a chance. He could have seen that and been like, out of all of these stores around here, this health clinic is the only one that has that sign that says no firearms. So he knows if I go in there, I'm safe. No one's going to be carrying in there, going to a doctor's appointment of all things. That would have literally been the biggest, you might as well paint a bullseye on that building. So every time that I go somewhere, and I actually got kicked out of Costco a couple of years ago, it was the last time that I shopped there, because I was open carrying, because I was still waiting on my concealed carry license to come back. And I had a man come up to me in Costco and tell me that I needed to leave and kind of throw him back. And he literally kicked me out because I was open carrying in Costco. And apparently they have there's nothing on the front doors, but he said when you sign up for your Costco membership, that says you will not carry a firearm in Costco. And I'm like, why? And I thought about it. I talked to my girlfriend at the time. I was like, well, what good is that going to do? If a criminal is willing to kill, no guns allowed isn't going to phase them in the least. In fact, it's almost going to be more of an enticement for them to engage that area, because they know everyone else is trying to obey the law. They realize that, it sucks, but that's the policy that place has, and part of America, that's part of, you respect that. So anytime I see those stupid signs that say no guns allowed, it's like, you guys are painting a big picture that tells people this is where you should, if you want to hurt people, prime place to do it. And it was so infuriating, and has really made me second guess, if some place has a no gun thing on their door, short of it being a federal building, a bank, the places you can't carry by law, if they've just got some deep at the door from now on, I'm sorry, but I was helpless. I hate to admit it, but I was crying.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to judge you for that.
I just witnessed somebody be killed. Technically 2 people, but I didn't learn that later. And I don't care what sign you put on your business. I don't care if you lose my business. I don't care if you're my favorite store in the whole world. If you put that sign up, I'm not going to subject my safety in the event that something that, again, I never thought would happen here, but look, it did. I'm not going to subject myself to that same fear because you think guns are big and scary, and so I need to leave my gun in the car or at home. And then when stuff actually goes down, I'm sitting there like, cool, I've got a wooden door and an aluminum exam table in front of me. That's it. If he gets past that, game over.
Yeah.
So I become passionate about like these policies, and people don't think about it. A sign on a door is not going to stop anything. It's not going to deter someone. It is only going to encourage it. So for anyone out there watching, to each their own, make your own decisions. But it's like, as me, someone who has lived through it, if they've got that sign on the door and you're like, I better follow the rules, if it's not a law, I'm sorry, but I would much rather get in trouble with a business and have them tell me you can't come back here than be stuck in that room, my mouth dry, me on the verge of tears, sending a picture to my mom like, I don't know what's about to happen. Some people may think that's dramatic. I didn't know. And again, rounds were flying through the window, and you feel that anger and that helplessness of, did I do all the right things? Oh God, if he kills me, I've got a dog at home. Is anyone going to like think, oh, he had a pet, someone needs to go take care of him? So many things go through your mind, and you're so mad. And that's why I become so passionate about, it's much better to get in a little bit of trouble, not legally, putting that out there, but you don't want to be in that situation I was in where you're like, there's a threat right there, and I've got nothing to neutralize it. It's an AR-15. Those rounds are going to go through this door. They could probably go through the cinder block walls. I've got nothing. And he obviously doesn't care about the rules. So if that's the case, why am I having to follow the rules? You're putting me in a situation where, God, I might not walk out of here, or anyone else that's stuck in there, barricaded in these exam rooms or whatnot, either. So
Yeah.
that's the infuriating part.
Yeah. Nope. Brother, let me tell you, if anybody agrees with you, it's me. I've been in situations before, and I've not mass shooting situations, but situations where safety was an issue. And I remember there's the initial kind of disbelief this is happening, and then there's this kind of helplessness, and then there's a kind of anger that kind of takes over. So I totally get it, man. Well,
I from that vantage point, but
I'll say that again. I'm
again,
sorry.
I may not have been able to do anything immediately. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy, the male victim, I can see his house right outside this window. He lives at the next street down,
Yeah.
and having to see that constant reminder, and it's like the loss and the pain that has been caused. And his two little girls, I had to drive through there the other day, and his youngest daughter. Sorry, I'm trying to keep it together right now.
No, you're good, man.
His youngest daughter, they have a basketball hoop in the street, and his youngest daughter was out there just shooting baskets all by herself. And I was like, this, I may not have been able to save her dad in that moment. I wish I could have. And whatever the female was thinking in her car, I mean, being trapped in there, and I mean, she had no time to react, but at least I could have been helpful to the people that were within the range of the protection that I had. And so, and I think I mentioned this to you before, it's already been politicized here too. At the candlelight vigil they had, who he was, but he stood up there and turned it into a political speech and started rambling about guns are bad. We don't need guns in Crozet. Nobody needs to carry guns. It's like, and it's just like, you don't get it. And these people will never get it. You don't understand. A gun could have very easily, and actually I think we can say, based on how quickly he was taken out, a gun was the answer. He had 4 loaded magazines on him. He had intentions to take down many more people than he did. A gun was the solution, and no one's going to talk about that doesn't like guns or thinks guns are scary, because it doesn't fit their narrative. This shouldn't be a narrative. This should be a look at it objectively and say, take the agent out of it. He had a firearm on him, and he was able to neutralize the threat before anyone else was injured or worse. So that's the biggest thing that boggles my mind. And like you said perfectly, I've gotten past the fear and the grief, and I've gotten much more into the anger of it, and being sick and tired of people saying guns are the problem. No, look at it. And I actually I don't mention that at all in this podcast, but the rounds that were flying through the window that passed right by me, those weren't the shooter's rounds. Those are rounds from the agent himself. Now, granted, it's like people look at that, see, the good guy with the gun almost took you out. If he would have nailed me or paralyzed me or whatever, I would have been like, you know what? Don't care. You still stopped someone from hurting many more people. And so, those are the two biggest things, honestly, in all of this is make sure you're an advocate. Don't be afraid to speak up. If people try to politicize it, don't get angry. Just talk to them and say, let's look at this in the timeline that unfolded. Don't just look at it as a bad guy with an AR killed some people, because guess what? He took out 2. You can take out 2 people with a knife. You can take out 2 people with, the most rudimentary of weapons with anything. And secondly, if anyone out there finds themselves in this situation, do not be a dumbass like me and stand there and watch. I know fear is a funny thing. It will cause you to lock up and stare and try to figure out and process, wait, is this really happening? Doesn't matter. You don't have time to figure out, is this fake or is this real? Seek cover, seek concealment, seek anything around you. If you can barricade yourself, use whatever resources are around you. And make sure that you're forcing yourself outside of the fear to run through your mind of, okay, what happens if he gets in here? Or if you are carrying, don't just jump to, well, let me start engaging immediately. If there's avenues where there can be a more effective method for you, like I said, to let him close the distance. Just if you need to carry, be ready for that moment. And if there's people around you, make sure they know they're going to be frozen too. Take charge, say it, and like I said, active shooter may not, because mine caused people to look. When I said active shooter, they wanted to be like, what? No way. Push them out of the way, cuss at them, scream, doesn't matter. Break them out of that kind of shock. Don't let them, because if they look, they may get frozen just like you were. Seek cover, concealment, and start evaluating your options, because you never know how much time that you have. And again, even with my limited options, it's like I at least came up with the very crude method of trying to stop.
I want to end with this, because you brought up a point earlier that I kind of want to touch on and end on. And I think it's very important that doesn't get talked about quite enough. Being a concealed carrier and being in a situation like that, the level of awareness that you need to have goes above and beyond anything else you can think of. Because as you pointed out, if you had been there, the guy with the Glock in his hand standing out there too, it's very easily that agent or that civilian with a gun who took him down could have looked at you and saw you as a threat as well. And I think that conversation needs to be had more, because I don't think people have it and aren't aware of it. They don't think about that, especially when you're in an environment where there are multiple people who could be concealed carrying. That's where the level of awareness, it needs to be heightened exceedingly so. Almost, you probably need to have more awareness than the person that's actually doing the shooting, the truth be told, because the last thing you want to do is find yourself in a situation where you're just being a lawful gun owner, concealed carrier, and you're going to stop the threat the same way someone else is, and there's a confusion there. So I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because it doesn't get talked about enough.
Absolutely. And like I said, that's why it didn't happen in this situation, but people need to realize there may be others out there carrying just like you, and pause and evaluate your environment. Make sure you're looking and kind of you're kind of looking and seeing. Don't just assume that anyone that has the weapon is the bad guy. Make sure that you're taking in everything that's around you. And the good news is everything's going to happen in slow motion, apparently. So you have plenty of time to kind of react, go from there. So I completely agree with your point. So to have that awareness and keep in the back of your mind, like, you might not be the only good guy out there. And the last thing that you want is, for lack of better terms, a blue on blue or a green on green situation. But yeah, I mean, like I said, absolutely great point. And again, thank you so much, because in that video, that's what made me reach out to you, is everything that you were saying is everything that the news cut out of my interview. The whole, I'm so glad there was armed, that I regret not being armed myself.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, me to your channel, and I went down the rabbit hole of watching all the interviews. And so, like, really appreciate you, and you giving me the time to really put this story out and kind of let everyone else know, like, when if this situation happens to anyone, God forbid, it's not going to play out like what you think, by any means. So, just make sure you evaluate what's around you, and don't freeze up. Whatever you do, don't freeze up, because I did it. I almost got taken out by the good guy. So.
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate you taking the time out to just tell your story, because I think a lot of people need to hear it, need to learn from the perspective. And so I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy. And you've been above and beyond honest here. And I respect that. I really do.
I appreciate you. So like I said, thank you again. And like I said, you earned a new subscriber. And, I look forward to future videos. Just the variety of content that you talk about has been awesome. So, but yeah, thank you so much for giving me the time of day to put my story out there. And I just, like I said, I hope that this can really be something where we take what can be valuable out of a tragedy, for anyone that may be involved in it in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Appreciate it, brother. One thing's for certain and two things are for sure. Politicians and tech giants don't want gun content to be recommended to you. And we're all fighting this culture war together. Now, you can help do your part by liking, commenting, subscribing to the channel, but most importantly, sharing this video with at least one person. Together, we can stop the suppression of our 2A rights. And don't forget to click the link in the description section of this video for the products that I mentioned in this video.